tonight's speaker series. This is so much fun. This is my first time doing it, so I'm very excited. So year number 22, or who's counting, we're not sure, but definitely year number 22. Mickey and Jon's bird ID quiz. So let's give a warm welcome to Mickey and Jon. Yes. Actually, you don't want to right. Oh, yeah. My bad. I get that for you.
For those in Zoom, just a quick interlude while we switch computers here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, I'll start off real quick. Well, it's our, as you know, our 22-ish year of doing these bird quizzes. Sometimes we concentrate on a single family. Lately, we've just kind of been selecting a variety of birds to cover, kind of a mix that hopefully is fun and interesting. So it's not meant to stump the audience, really. It's supposed to be fun and educational. And Mickey and I certainly enjoy doing it each year. So the program, as I said, cover a variety of birds, audience participation encouraged. If you have a guess about a bird before we reveal it, by all means, or if you have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand or interrupt. And we'll discuss basically identification of various birds, including behavior, vocalizations, habitat, and whatever other handy aspects might help come into play to identify a bird. Do we leave the lights on at full? Or
Oh, we need the lights off, yeah.
I just thought it's easier probably for folks at home to see. Cool, thank you.
No.
There we go.
That's pretty good.
All right, I'll jump in on the first slide. So we always, as you may know, if you've been to any one of these, we just kind of work through the identification process. And you get a small looking, probably yellowish green bird here. It's got a very thin pointed bill. So that probably takes us to the warbler clan, group of warblers. So a warbler that's kind of greenish above and yellowish below, and also features this, oops, too quick. Now you know. So I was trying to hit the pointer. So it's got an interesting combination of kind of a split eye ring and a pale supercilium or eyebrow stripe. So as you now already know, this is an orange crown warbler, common year-round bird in addition to migrants in spring and fall, but it's also common in winter and as a breeding bird in summer. And this is kind of like one of the default warbler that you generally see. But it is distinctive in the greenish upper parts and yellowish underparts. And there's usually some kind of faint streaking on the underparts, which can be very tricky to see. But where's that orange crown? Well, it does in fact have an orange crown. And a lot of these birds were named in the old days when they were named from specimens. So you could examine every bit of the bird and go, oh, it's got an orange crown. Very rarely do you see that in the field. If it's agitated or excited, you might see it, but it does in fact have a little orange crown right there. What's actually kingbirds have the same thing, so it's a not uncommon feature in some birds.
Well, we don't have too many ducks tonight. This might be the only one. And this looks like a pretty big duck with a very green head. And some people might say if it has a green head, it has to be a mallard or a shoveler. But not everybody would say that, especially people like Dave that works at a water bird rehab center. So this is a bird with a pale back, grayish mottling there or vermiculations right behind on the upper mantle area. Looks like a huge bill, very large. And if it's that big, maybe this is a scaup. And if it's a scaup, we only have two we usually worry about, the lesser and the greater. And that has nothing to do with their talents or abilities. It's about size. So if it has a big bill like this, a rounded greenish looking head versus purple, and that big black nail on the end. Can you point that out, John? I guess you can, everybody can see that big black nail.
This little tip,
My pointer is
blackish tip on the bill is called the bill nail. And it's larger, more extensive, typically in greater, much more abbreviated in lesser skull.
So there's very little, oh yeah, things on these two birds. You got to be careful. The head color works well in perfect lighting, but they can both look a little purpley, or they can both maybe look a little green sheen. But it's purple on the lesser and green on the greater. And the rounded head that peaks over the top, right in the center, is a better mark as well. So really, the shape of the bird actually helps identify it. But the bill is really big. It really helps, of course, to have them both together.
And just a real quick note, scaup are birds that we get in the winter, fall migration in winter through spring. Greater scaup is the far lesser common. It's in deep water lakes in the interior and coastally often. Lesser scaup is kind of the default one that you're going to see most of the time, but typically only in winter. You get a few lesser scaups summering, but by and large, it's a fall and winter bird. So it's a greater scaup male. And then thought we'd cover a couple of raptors. A lot of people's, one of their favorite groups, if not the favorite. Very interesting birds. So two birds that aren't really that closely related, we thought we'd cover. On the left, you have pretty large looking bird, very pale, kind of whitish head, pretty big bill, especially this bill gape is quite large in this species. And it's got this kind of rusty coloration on the back here. And its scientific name, well, its common name actually implies that rufous coloration. So it's ferruginous, which was related to rust color. So what we've got is a ferruginous hawk. And they're kind of similar to red-tailed hawks in that there is a reddish rust coloring on the distal outer half of the tail, but a whitish tail base. But you can see a little bit of that kind of pale reddish rust color there. Whereas a red tail, of course, has a full red tail. Ferruginous hawks, very rare on the coastal slope. We only get them in fall, winter. When I say winter, I'm kind of referring to fall migration through spring migration. But these birds are, if you want to see a ferruginous hawk, you typically go out to the Antelope Valley, check out the agricultural fields, and sometimes you just see them flying over. But they're fairly, relatively common for a hawk, wintering bird in the Antelope Valley. And then on the right, ferruginous hawks actually kind of bridge the gap between buteos, soaring hawks, and eagles in size. This bird on the right is pretty distinctive in that it's very brownish, but it's got these white wing patches, white base of the primaries, and also at the base of the tail. So that color combination should lead us to golden eagle. And this bird was up near Red Box this summer, soaring around. I think it was seen up there several times, so probably nesting somewhere nearby. But obviously very large bird, all kind of chocolate brown, but younger birds have the white base of the tail and base of the primaries.
So hummingbirds, we always wish all our hummingbirds would come as males. It's much easier. The same with ducks too, right? But they don't come that way. Over half of them are going to be either females or juveniles. So let's talk about shape. This is definitely a hummingbird. I don't have to go much further. What I look for, and I don't know when I learned it along the way, but that little round head for this big fat body compared, which is 2.5 inches long, but rounded head and a true neck. Most hummingbirds seem to have their head glued right onto the body. So I look for that first. It's pretty palish. Overall, the bill is slightly down curved. I think if you can imagine here, if you can separate the wings from the tail, this looks like a little notched tail. And you can see it even better in the field. It'll be a pretty good V. And that's a mark that I hadn't seen earlier in most of the early field guides. So this looks like a black-chinned hummingbird. I think that green is even a slightly different pale green chartreuse. than you see on some of the other hummingbirds.
And Black Chin tends to have a slightly longer, slightly more curved downward bill than Anna's hummingbird, which is probably the one that is most easily confused with. And if you look really carefully, I don't find this of much use when I'm observing the bird, but from photos, again, they have these relatively narrow inner primaries up here, whereas Anna's would have wider looking inner primary. So, but I've never found that really useful in the field. I never get that good a look. But if you have a photograph you can study and blow up, it's pretty good. And this one will fall to me. Well, this happens to be a photo that I took last fall. I was very fortunate, I felt, to find this bird. This was up at Jackson Lake in the eastern San Gabriel Mountains. And again, we have a kind of small, compact bird with a kind of slim, pointed bill. Overall shape and pattern probably leads us to the wood warbler family, the warblers. And the things to notice in this bird are this very kind of warm, pale, yellowish wash on the breast and a little bit here on the back and face. And also, not super easy to see in this picture, but these pale tram lines are what they call on the back, like very, very distinctive of a Blackburnian warbler. And this bird's very faintly marked because it's a first-year bird, was born that spring or summer. But was a very, very cool find up there. And as I saw this afternoon, it looks like at present the bridge fire is not quite to Jackson Lake. So hopefully that neat birding area will be spared. But pretty rare fall warbler in Southern California.
Well, we could have two birds here, two species, or we could have one. This really is here to show you what effects of lighting on coloration. Bird on the left, you can see the lights coming through the tail, so the sun looks like it's behind and maybe to the right of the bird. And this other side is a much clearer, cleaner picture. It brings out more of the natural color. So these are both in the flycatcher family, tyrannid group. Long tails, rust on the tail. This could, sometimes the crest shows, sometimes it doesn't, crested head. And wing bars, rusty wing panel on the primaries. So these are both the same thing. Ash-throated flycatcher. I would call it our default rusty flycatcher. There are a couple others to watch out for if you're after the rarities. Dusky capped, brown crested, and in the same group. And so it pays to study your book, but this really shows you, it looks like we have a gray bird on the left and a brown on the right.
Yeah, lighting can really affect. It doesn't affect shape though, which is always a really good mark. And then another hawk. Hawks can be tricky. This bird's shape overall, with these not super short, but not real long wings, and this long tail are going to lead us to accipiters, which in Southern California should leave us with Coopers and sharp-shinned to choose from. Sharp-shinned hawk has this kind of messy brown barring streaking on the chest, and generally a squarish shaped tail. Now, the squareness of the tail is not always the best mark, but if you could see this in better light, all these tail feathers would be about equal length. So all of equal length rather than graduated shorter. So this is a sharp-shinned hawk, juvenile, in flight with a long tail and that blurry streaking on the breast. Kind of, it looks, even from this thing, I can tell it has kind of a small, short head. Excuse me. And pretty much a winter visitor for us. And there are very few records, very, very few records of this species breeding anywhere in Southern California mountains. So you're only going to see it in fall and winter through spring.
Well, I think this one's easier. First of all, it looks bigger, which is a difficult thing to tell. One's flying, one's perched. This guy has a gray, I mean, a dark gray, slaty gray cap. It has considerable white on the tip of the tail. The tail looks like it could be rounded if were spread. I think this feather is growing. That last photo, you may have seen a thin white edging to the tip of the tail, but if you have a Cooper's in flight, you can look for a more distinctive white band on the end. We know this is an adult because it has orange bars, not vertical streaks of a juvenile. And the legs are fairly husky. The sharp-shinned hawk got its name because it has a thin leg with a sharp edge on it. You can only see mostly in laboratory. So this looks like a classic adult Cooper's. And if I could guess, it's so large that it may be a female, but I'm not going to go that far.
And Cooper's hawk is interesting. One of my favorite birds. When I first started birding, and people who've been birding for a long time may remember, it was never a rare bird, but it was not anywhere near as common or widespread as it is today. A combination of factors, not the least of which being the fact that DDT pesticide was banned, which was causing reproductive failure in a lot of high-end predators, especially those that fed on fish and birds. But they've recovered remarkably well. And anywhere I walk, even in the city, I often see them perched on a wire or flying through suburbia, hunting pigeons and doves and things like that. But they have really done well and adapted really well to human environments.
We stayed out of mentioning this gruesome situation here with looks like a juvenile bird to me, maybe taken right out of a nest. But that's their job. It used to be called chicken hawks, right?
Yeah.
Across the country, take people's chickens. They were considered vermin.
So we have a couple of geese, white geese. If you eliminate domestic geese, which are usually very chunky and kind of.
I wish we could.
Yeah, true. If you can eliminate domestic geese, which don't have pink bills and they look very stocky and kind of pot-bellied because they don't migrate, they don't fly. These birds do migrate and fly, so they're a little more trim. They can't be too heavy. So we have this white bird on the left, which is an adult, and then we have this immature bird on the right. So obviously, there's a size difference. And if you can see the bill, you can still see, even in this photo, you can see a difference. Now, that's a pretty short bill with a pretty narrow gap, or what they call grinning patch, between the upper and lower mandible. And this bird on the right, if you can look here, kind of obscured, but it's got a bigger bill and a thicker grinning patch. So we should be able to say that this bird on the right, with its black wingtips, is also a good feature, is a snow goose, immature bird. And this bird on the left, a lot smaller with a smaller bill and a very narrow grinning patch, is a Ross's goose. Both of those are primarily winter visitors. If you go out to Apollo Park, though, there's usually, or Santa Fe Dam, there's one or two of each that have essentially taken up residence there, and they don't migrate. So they still count, but they're kind of not legitimate wild migratory birds anymore.
Well, this is a beauty and a medium-sized bird, it looks like. It's got a pretty hefty bill. It looks like it's been dusted all over with pollen, but it's the color of a wintering bird. Females look like this also. In summer, this bird will be bright, fairly bright red, or maybe liver colored. That has something to do with the name. One of their favorite foods is bees. They'll wait in a tree either with a beehive or with bees coming to the flowers and pick off bee after bee, chomp on them quickly and swallow. So with a big bill like this, darkened wings, yellow all solidly up and down the breast and belly, I think this is a hepatic tanager, not your common run-of-the-mill tanager in our area.
This bird wintered last winter at Banning Park in Wilmington. Was there for several months at least. So, and this grayish wash and cheek patch here is a good mark. Not too obvious in this photo, but that's a good mark for hepatic tanager as well.
So these are coming up from Mexico and into Arizona, but not much closer to us typically. So it'd be a rare winter visitor.
All right, another a little green, little brown bird, the bane of birders everywhere. So this photo was taken at Hansen Dam, and things to look for are the bill. We almost always go to the bill as a key field mark because it can separate pretty much every group of birds except shorebirds. If it's in the same family, bill basically looks the same, either skinny or curved or sharp or long. Shorebirds have a huge variety of bills, so it doesn't pin it down exactly to the group, but you've got this pretty heavy bill, and sorry, I can't get this pickle out of my throat. This pretty heavy bill, and if you can see at all, there's a little hook at the tip. It's also got these kind of bluish gray legs. And this wing bar is kind of buried under some feathers, and it's got this other prominent wing bar here. And it's got this split kind of eye ring, white eye ring here. So this is actually a Hutton's vireo. Really cool bird, primarily of oaks, but you can also find them sometimes in riparian areas. And this is unique among our vireos in that it's a year-round resident. So they stay throughout the year. They're essentially non-migratory, whereas all the other vireos are pretty highly migratory. So Hutton's.
So then this fellow looks a lot lankier, longer, larger, and fairly plain looking, very white underneath though. And that's one thing I look for in this group. There's those gunmetal gray-blue legs again, which I believe all North American vireos have. So if I see this clean white way up in a tree and the blue-gray legs, but what I'm looking for is this slightly blurry supercilium. It's wide and a little jaggedy at the edges, not as sharp as other birds. So there's that little hook again. So we have vireos that supposedly, I think, grips and kills caterpillars, one of their foods. So gray on the back, white below, pretty simple combinations, and then the blurry big supercilium. Supercilious people are supposed to raise their eyebrows a lot. So that's a supercilium. And I think this should be a warbling vireo. There's people who go around looking, they're checking these to make sure we don't have the Eastern style of warbling vireo. I don't check them, but you should learn more about them. I believe they're one of those candidates for a possible split. But they're pretty similar, but you're likely only to see our Western warbling vireo.
All right, now a sparrow, the other group of birds that typically confuses and puts people off. But sparrows are not that difficult when you get a little experience. There's always some feature or two that separates each species. So if we look at this bird, we got a pale, streaky sparrow. Great mark for this bird is this yellowish wash right here above the eye, and also this very pale appearance and fine streaking on the underparts. Pink legs, so that should lead us to a savanna sparrow. It's like a typical form that we get. There's several subspecies in the mix, but they more or less look all like this. And it's, again, a winter bird, so a fall migrant through spring. And they prefer open spaces, weedy fields, open fields, lawns sometimes, but you'll never find these birds in chaparral or forest.
Very white below, and those pink legs help too. You can go ahead and transition into this.
Yeah, I will. I'll take this one too. So this looks kind of similar, but not entirely similar. This is actually a different subspecies of savanna sparrow. So we got a very dark, heavily marked bird, more heavily streaked. Overall, it looks pretty much like our last bird in general appearance, but just dark and heavily streaked, and especially this longer, much more elongated bill. So this is a Belding's savanna sparrow, which is pretty threatened status because they're only in our coastal salt marshes along Southern California coast. So this one happened to be at Malibu Lagoon, where they're not expected generally, but at Point Magoo in the marshes there, Orange County, down at Newport Back Bay, you might find them. Bolsa Chica is a good place to look for them in Orange County, Bolsa Chica Lagoon, and also the Bayona wetlands down by Playa del Rey is a good place to find these. And they're resident; they don't migrate.
Uh-oh, more shorebirds. Did we have a shorebird yet? No.
No, but we will.
Okay. Here's two shorebirds turned toward you and away from you, but we think they're the same thing. Just to me, the first thing I think about, this is a mid-sized, I don't know if you can tell from those little bubbles of rock in the background, if these are mid-sized shorebirds, not the little guys, bigger than Western, bigger than Leith sandpiper. This is one we're on the lookout right now in the last few weeks and continuing, coming through from a long distance. You should go home and look this one up and look at the range map. They're nesting extreme north tundra and south down into South America, I think, passing through our area. So you got to be impressed with the distance. These look like Baird sandpipers, scaly back, kind of a pretty beige coloration, and a little wash across the breast. And takes a little time to get used to this one in the mid-size range compared to those little guys. So Baird sandpiper.
And these very long wings, primaries sticking out well past the tail is a good mark as well. Very kind of buffy, pale, nicely marked bird. These were at Bayona Salt Pan down by Playa del Rey a few weeks ago.
If you push that button, I think the name will appear.
Baird sandpiper.
Probably another candidate for a name change.
Yeah, that will be called something else. And then more sandpipers. Well, it's always good to study. Sandpipers can be tricky, especially the small peeps. So we don't know, do we have one or two or even three species in this photo? All foraging. This one on the top here has got an obviously very long bill, slightly decurved at the tip. These rust scapulars are a good clue for a fall juvenile Western sandpiper. Very small bird, but these rust scapulars are a great mark, as is the long decurved bill. Excuse me. I believe females have the longer bills compared to males generally. So that could be a female and this could be a male, but similar looking. Black legs as opposed to leaf sandpiper, which has yellow legs. This bird, in fact, is the same species, but its bill is buried, but you can still see the rust color on the scapulars, so that you could probably figure out that it's a Western sandpiper. And this bird does look a little different, though. Maybe not to everybody, but if you look closely, you look at this bird's got a plain kind of beige brown back, a little bit of a scaly pattern here. It's rather different than the upper parts of these two species. And this straight, rather short bill. That's a good clue for semi-palmated sandpiper, which is a rare fall migrant. We've had maybe a half a dozen this fall along the LA River primarily, where they're typically found as a summer and fall migrant. But I know if you haven't studied them a lot, these look pretty much exactly the same. And you really have to take a close look to make sure you've got a semi-palmated. But there are a little bit differences in shape. It's a little stockier, plumper bird. Supposedly it has more of a plover-like face pattern, more distinct. I haven't found that to be terribly helpful. Normally I go by the back pattern and this short, straight bill, because Western's always going to have a down-curved bill. So Western and semi-palmated.
Oh, I almost tried to talk into it. So this is one more shore bird. This looks pretty brownish. There's some rust in there, but overall the bird is more brown. I'm pretending I can see that this one's smaller than the Westerns. You see how small it is compared to the Western. But there's bright yellow legs, even though they're in the water, you can see yellow legs and feet. So if this is a diminutive sandpiper with a short but sharp bill, thin, rather thin at the base, and we'd have to look back at our western, which has a thicker bill. So little brown guys are easy to pick out usually, and they're the least sandpipers, among the smallest sandpipers in the world. Very tiny, sparrow size approximately.
And always look for yellow feet. Among the smaller sandpipers, least is the one that has yellow feet and legs. Although they can be smeared with mud if they're foraging in mud, and that can make them dark. So just one thing to keep in mind. Oh, we have still more sandpipers. I think we're done with sandpipers after this one. Anyway, this is very similar to least sandpiper. If you look at the least, and then this one, but take a look at the breast pattern on this one. It's very heavily streaked with a very abrupt cutoff at the bottom. It also has a similar shaped bill to the least, a little bit thicker at the base, but you'll notice it's also two-toned. It's got a pale base and a dark tip. It does have the yellow legs and feet like least, but it's a significantly larger bird. And this happens to be a pectoral sandpiper. And it gets its name from the air sacs that the breeding male inflates on breeding territory as a display, which we never see. But that's a very rare spring and uncommon but regular fall transient through our area. And if anyone's interested, we got another bird down here in front, way out of focus, that with a two-tone bill and brown upper parts and this strong, thick breast band is a semi-palmated plover.
Well, we can agree these are not ducks, they're not hawks, they're not a lot of things they're not. That's one way to identify your birds. And actually, I think that's how our brain works, is super quickly eliminating a bunch of things. And then we're left with sparrows. Two kind of drabbish sparrows, grayish, brownish. The one on the left was at Blue Ridge before the fire this past spring. Several of these popped in and perched, and this is 8,000 feet. So I thought at first brewer's sparrow because it has an eye ring. It has some streakiness. Even the top of the head to me looks streaky like a brewer's. But I got to thinking this didn't look quite right. And we have some good strong mustachial marks and marks below and the big white. I think that's really the mustachial mark. White outlined in black shows through. So I began to realize, maybe after I got home, I realized these were upslope movements of sagebrush sparrows. That is sage sparrows, Bell's. It's actually Bell's sparrow. I don't like the name changes they did on these. It hasn't helped me. We have sage sparrows, Bell's sparrows, sagebrush sparrows, different species now. But this one's the deserty side, since you're looking down at the desert from Blue Ridge, and these came up to get cooled off probably. Then on the right is a pretty different looking young bird, young sparrow. It's got a stronger facial pattern, that white eye, stripe behind the eye, another good strong mustachial and white throat. The bill is kind of dark gray. And these trickle in here every summer into our area. We've had them in the canyon here rarely. And these are coming from the desert, moving in, mostly in the summer. And this is a black-throated sparrow with no black throat, juvenile. But if you want to see a black throat, look at the adult next. And that's the one that's much easier to identify.
Is one of the most attractive looking sparrows I think there are. Really nice looking bird.
So I go out to Saddleback Butte State Park for these. There's other places, but creosote bush woodland desert, they do fine there, along with sage sparrow, Bell's sage sparrow.
And more sparrows, just because we know how much you love these. So we picked these two just because they're two relatively common sparrows and they're quite similar in appearance. So the one on the left, we'll notice, is very warmly colored. It's got this buff colored malar streak here, kind of rust on the crown. these fine, faint streaks on the belly coming overlaid with a buffy wash and a very petite bill. So this one is a Lincoln's sparrow, another one that will have its name changed in the not too distant future, I'm sure. But Lincoln sparrows are winter visitors. So they appear in September and leave by April, but they're not here in summer. There are very few pairs that breed in the San Gabriel Mountains at higher elevations, but that's about it as far as breeding. And then on the right, kind of generally similar in pattern. It's got this streaky underparts. Face pattern is similar, but it's more of a monotypic color pattern. It's not as bright and warm and attractive as Lincoln sparrow. And this is a little bit bigger bird, a little bit heavier bill, but song sparrows are default sparrow year round. You can find them throughout the year in a variety of habitats, usually near water or brushy areas near water. But keep in mind the face pattern and the breast with this buff wash. Now, juvenile song sparrows can look a lot more like Lincoln sparrows, but we only have to worry about them for a brief period in spring and early summer.
Okay, these are two flycatchers. We can get that far quickly. They're sitting upright, look like they're ready to sally out after an insect. The one on the left has a super bright throat looking at us, an all yellow lower mandible. It's supposed to not have an eye ring. Do you not see an eye ring there? Okay. Sometimes
pretty faint.
The flesh of the eye is actually not a colored ring. It's not on the feathers. It might be on the eye. But to me, this is one of the brownest of all the flycatchers. In the spring and fall, I look for brownness in these. They're almost mockingbird size and pretty long tail. But I'd like you to look at both birds quickly and look at the tail the wing projection. This bird wings go way down past at least to the end of the undertail coverts, making the tail look shorter in a way. This one looks like a super long tail and it stops here. We covered it before. The longer the wings, the longer the flight usually in migration. Pointy wings, long pointy wings usually mean long distance migrants. Anyway, back to this one. Voice is important, and we could easily separate these two by voice. This one has the Fitzbugh song,
Yep.
So that's very good. I didn't know John was going to.
I heard one in last week in the Sepulveda Basin was still calling, migrating south at this time of year. So,
or a wit call also.
Wit call.
And so that's a willow flycatcher on the left, and on the right, much grayer bird. I don't see the brown, but of course we're looking at the underside. It has a gray vest that is at least partially unbuttoned. The bill should be more dark overall, maybe a little bit yellowy toward the base. And we mentioned already the long wings. And if anything, these sit very upright. So when I see a flycatcher sitting almost straight up and down, I think of a pewee, Western wood pewee. So that should be the bird on the right.
Yep. And willow flycatchers, as Mickey noted, we get them only in migration. They're extirpated as a breeder. It used to be a very common breeder in the LA Basin before all the riparian and swampland was cleared. They also do not occur in winter. There may be 2 or 3 records ever for winter in Southern California. Western wood peewees, on the other hand, a common spring and fall migrant, and they also breed quite commonly in the San Gabriel Mountains. And a couple more flycatchers. Now, these are 2 that are really good to know. If you look at this bird, ought to be pretty familiar. I always think of this bird's head as kind of these dark storm clouds, really dark thunder rain clouds, because the color is very different from this bird on the right. And this has a very contrasty white chin here. And of course, it's yellow below. Pretty chunky bird with a heavy, short bill. And that should lead us to Cassin's kingbird, which is a year-round resident. So we can see those anytime on the coastal slope. And then on the right, we have a very closely related species, but much paler head. This bird's a little more faded, so it's not quite a exactly fair comparison, but a very pale head with this darker contrasty line through the eye. And if you look closely, you can see these white outer tail feather edges. Now you do see this pale edge on the Cassin's kingbird, but it's just that, a pale edge to the feather, whereas Western kingbird has conspicuous white outer tail feathers. And when it flies or lands, they're very obvious. So almost identical in size. And Western kingbird, spring and fall migrant and summer visitor, getting more common in winter, but still a rare bird for us in winter.
Very different voices. All right. Chabir on this one. Something like that.
Yeah.
And the other
Western-
one I'm not going to do.
Yeah, they have a long twittering song and a kind of.
Well, okay. John sent these slides over and I looked at this one and said, oh, okay, I see what he's doing. He's showing you a juvenile over here on the left. Very dull looking bird, not much color, all one color at least, brownish, no streaks, kind of a pointy bill, mid-sized bill. And I know from working in the nature centers, people would bring these in for us to care for. And it's very tricky identification when you see your first one. The one on the right, I said, oh, okay, then he put an adult of the same thing in. No, I looked at the bill, looked for a few seconds and realized, no, he didn't do that. He put in a different species. So over here, we have a much thicker bill, even though it's quite pointy. Very streaky bird below and brown above. But this is the female of the species. So on the left, we have a European starling, juvenile. It hasn't picked up all its colors yet and streaks. And on the right, we have a red-winged blackbird, but female type. So the starling story you probably all know, and so look it up and you see how far that bird went from New York City area to all across to California, moved by itself, introduced from Europe. Red wings are a traditional marshy bird in our area, native bird. Driving across the country through Utah and all the way to Ohio, to me, this was the #1 bird on posts and fences was red-winged blackbirds. You get to town and they're on people's lawns. It's all across the country.
This is yours, so I don't know if you want to do that one or have me do this one.
Well, I'll go ahead. I know the story well because it happened this spring. We were up at Blue Ridge again, 8,000 feet in the mountains, and 2 birds flew in right over us and landed, 50 feet away. And I said, wow, I'm with my friend Terry. And I said, well, what do we have here? This must be longspurs. They look like longspurs. Oh, wait a minute. There's one of those scaly back guys. That's the Sprague's pipit. Sprague's pipit has those scales on the back. Wait a minute. What is this thing? And I did not know for, 10 minutes. And then after I looked at the book at home, it was much easier. I don't see juvenile horned larks very often, but this is a lark. And there were 2 there and they hung around together and allowed photos. So juvenile horned larks probably born elsewhere and flew up to 8,000 feet to visit and look for food. So I can't say I'm very familiar with these marks, but you can see a juvenile scaly pattern on the back, very white below. It's not picking up any of the yellow color or black mask of an adult yet. The throat, they're all just a muted brown. So threw me, and that's what happens when you see a new plumage.
This is one of Mickey's too, but I won't make him do 3 in a row. But I thought this was a great photo because this shows you a couple of features of this bird. Is maybe 3 features can illustrate why birds can be so confusing. So we've got a kind of grayish bird with white wing bars, this spotted breast, this wide gape here at the base of the bill should point us to a juvenile. So that means we might not be looking for this typical plumage that we see. And then this yellowish orangey coloration all over the face. So we can explain all of these features. This is a juvenile bird, and that explains the spotting below, which will fade as the bird matures. And it's also got this color here, but this is not really the color of the bird. This is pollen or some other staining from something it's been feeding on. So the other features, more or less, this is a terrible angle, but look at this wing, this gray wing with white wing bars. This shape, if you can see that bill a little bit better, kind of leads us to northern mockingbird. But I really like this photo because one is a juvenile, so we don't see those much of the year with the streaks below. And two, this coloration on the face I thought was really cool. It's a good illustration of how something can throw you off, but it's still a common bird that you're familiar with.
So this was at the Arboretum with lots and lots of flowers to poke your head into, and it's just loaded with pollen. I don't think of mockingbirds as regular pollinators, but we may want to look into that. Just loaded. The streak, those chevrons on the breast remind us this is one of the thrashers, and many of the thrashers are speckled or spotted. So it's telling us that that's related, at least when it's young. It stays related when it's adult too.
Cool.
Oh, I guess it's back to me.
I'll do two in a row if you like, but
okay.
This is again Mickey's slide, but relatively easy to identify, even though it might look a little nondescript. We've got this narrow pointed bill, got some fine streaking on the breast, kind of a yellowish wash under here, but a really strong yellow color on the undertail coverts. Is white spots on the distal end of the tail, pale supercilium. And we can't really see much of the crown, but it may have a tinge of rust in it. So this is actually a palm warbler, which is more a fall vagrant, sometimes spends the winter, but a lower end rarity in Southern California. And if we were actually seeing it forage, it would be pumping its tail a lot, which is a good clue to his identity. And often, as I say, you'll see a little rust on the crown is a good giveaway, but the tail pumping behavior and these fine streaks with kind of yellowish underparts are good clues.
This one's in a coast live oak with those cupped leaves. Okay. Darren, would you help us on this one? We changed the name on this one about an hour ago. We kept staring at it. I think it's my slide. If John doesn't recognize it, I think this is a bird that was called out at Whittier Narrows in the winter. I went down to find it and got some pictures. The head is turned slightly, so the bill may look intermediate size, but it's mostly black. We think the bill is smallish. We think that the wing projection helps a little bit. It's got a pretty good wash across the breast. But it said that Teddy Roosevelt visited Yosemite and ran in and met John Muir. And he said, John, how do you tell the Wright's flycatcher from the Hammonds? And the Wright's was now the Dusky. And it said that no one recorded the answer. But they're thinking John was much more of a geologist, naturalist than he was a birder. So he may not have been able, and with the field guides in those days, of which there were almost none, we have the wonderful advantage today of being able to sort these out. So John and I think this is a Hammond's flycatcher, partly because it was reported there and I went over and saw it. But we had it as a Dusky at first.
Yeah, when I first saw this photo, I thought, oh, the primaries, the wingtips look pretty short from this angle, so that would kind of lead you to Dusky. But then I realized Mickey had labeled it Hammond's. I go, well, maybe he had a good reason to do that. So this is the worst angle for Empidonax flycatchers to look at their primary extension. I always like to see it from the back, which gives you a much better indication of how long the wingtips are. So this is a really tricky group of birds, the Empidonax flycatchers, and a lot of birders, even experienced birders, have to let some birds go because they just don't get enough of a good look at it to separate it. So if you're early in your birding journey, don't worry that you can't separate these yet. You can always leave it at Empid SPA or SP for Empidonax species. Now this one's a little more distinctive. Bright lemon yellow below, pretty big head, looks like a pretty honking big bill. and forked tail. So this, we looked at Cassin's and Western kingbirds earlier. This is the other species of kingbird. There's actually 5, counting scissortail flycatcher, but this is the less common. But this big bill and this extensive yellow coming way up here and the forked tail can lead us to tropical kingbird. And a few of these every late summer through winter come up from Mexico, Arizona, and either spend a few days, few weeks, few months, or the whole winter. Depends anywhere from a few to maybe 8 or 10 in LA County each winter. That's Mickey's, so I don't know.
If it's mine, it probably was at the spreading grounds, San Gabriel River spreading grounds, where it stayed for many months. And came out in the open quite a bit.
They also have this more distinct black mask through the eye than the other kingbirds, which is a good feature.
Okay. This bird could be very problematic for a young birder, a new birder. I'm not sure why it isn't a house finch, right? It's almost a house finch. The bill looks like a house finch. It's beigey brown on the back, some streaking, 2 wing bars, brown on the wings. But look at that tail. Uh-oh, there's a little bit of bluish color in that tail. A little nice shading of blue. And up the breast, a belly at least, we don't see any streaking yet, like you would probably on a house finch. It's got a nice little beige eye ring that again might be feathers or it might actually be the tissue around the eye. So that bill is kind of crunched in a little. It looks thick and heavy, and not too long, but pointed. So we're thinking this is only one of 2 things, and it's either it's one of the buntings, and it should be a lazuli bunting, to be compared to the rarer indigo bunting that does reach here. That's a rarity to look for, but this would be a lazuli female or immature.
All right, and then 2 really quite similar looking birds, but these are actually 2 different species. You might recognize them as bluebirds because of the bluish color and this petite thrush-like bill. And this bird's got kind of bluish here and then a kind of a rust wash all over here. But look how long these wings are and how short they are compared to the tail. And compare that to the bird on the right, which has a little stronger rust wash below. So on the left, we have a mountain bluebird, female type. And you get these out on the Antelope Valley in winter. Occasionally on the coastal slope, 1 or 2 or a small group will show up, maybe at Brackett Field out by Benelli Regional Park or elsewhere there's open habitat. The males are super distinctive with this overall, this bright blue coloration overall, but females are a little trickier. But again, look for the very long wings and compared to a short tail. And on the right, we have our much more common resident Western bluebird female. Different hue of blue, a little bit hard to see in this. This is a very pale, bright blue. This is more of a deep blue, and a lot of rust, deep rust coloration here.
Okay, down toward the coast. Now we have 2 similar looking cormorants, big, husky, blackish birds. I don't know if they're attractive or not. They're mostly monocolor, but we look at the throat area for one thing, and one has a pale beigey throat on the right. The one on the left, though, also it's dark overall, but right away we should notice a skinny looking snake-like neck and head on the left, and a much thicker, heavier head on the right. The bill is also thick and heavy on the right, thin and maybe shorter on the left bird. I think the tail is a little longer on this species on the left. So these can be together at places like Bayona. If you go out on the jetties, you can look for up to 3 species of cormorant. It's a good place to study them. It helps to have a scope because sometimes they're a half a mile away out on the outer breakwater. But on the left, we should have a pelagic cormorant. On the right, is a Brandt's cormorant. The double-crested is pretty easy with an orangey bill and orange throat area, even some orange around the eye. So we just wanted to compare these two. The one that's missing is neotropic cormorant, which has some of these features. It's a much smaller bird, but it has that long tail on a neotropic cormorant, but it has a different facial pattern.
And also, while you get double-crested cormorants on the coast, as well as all throughout the inland North America, and neotropic cormorants are largely inland, these two species you find exclusively coastally, and usually not even in lagoons like Malibu Lagoon. You'll find them offshore, flying on the rocks and jetties, but they rarely really come ashore, even a very short distance. So if you've got them, say if it's the Sepulveda Basin or along the San Gabriel River, you're only going to be dealing with double-crested or neotropic. There's literally no inland records of pelagic or Brandt's. Never say never, but for all intents and purposes. And then we thought we'd look at a couple of gulls. It's a fairly easy one. You can see not the same bird. At least I don't recollect it was the same bird, but it's essentially in the same plumage, same appearance. One of our smaller gulls, largely white, not a lot of darkness on the wing. Our smaller gulls tend to not be brown as immatures as our larger gulls do. And this bird actually has a dark ring around the bill, which should be a pretty good clue. It's got a pale gray back. And so we can call this a ring-billed gull. Pretty slim bill, nothing like the big, nothing like the big deep bills you get on herring, western, or glaucous wing gulls. And then I'll just pick up on this one since it's another gull that's quite similar. A little bit smaller, very difficult to judge size in the field unless you have something to compare it with, but this is a very small petite gull. It's got a very small, slender bill, little dusky at the tip, very pale back, quite long-winged, but it looks pretty petite and delicate. But this is a short-billed gull. And this used to be called, if you have an older field guide, or most field guides haven't been updated yet, this used to be called the mew gull. Now, mew gull has been split into short-billed gull for North America and common gull for Europe. And common gull is also a rare vagrant on the East Coast in Eastern North America, but we don't get those out here. But this is the smallest West Coast gull, pretty scarce in Los Angeles County, but as you start going north, Ventura, Santa Barbara County, further north, they become quite common in winter. Most of our gulls, as you probably know, are winter visitors. A lot of Western gulls hang around and some California gulls and a few ring-billed, but the vast majority of gulls are visiting us in winter.
Some of you know, if you really want to go see one of these up close or a group of them, Cabrillo Beach is a very good spot. Sometimes you get none, but often you'll get 15 or so. And then the far west end of Leg Lake is a good closer place to look for them in the winter. They look about like this, usually this plumage. But you can tell them apart from the sitting around with the ring bills. I think this is a fairly easy bird. Tonight, I think, went pretty easily. We've been giving you birds you knew, and oh, I knew that one. I knew that one too. And this one, it's not a duck. We know that by looking at the bill. It swims around with the ducks and maybe with the coots. The bill looks sharp and fairly thin, not thick and thin and almost blunt. We have a dark cheek and dark going down the neck rather than a pure white front of the neck and cheek. The butt goes up, that is the rear end sticks up out of the water fairly high. And this is one of the small grebes, the eared grebe.
Yeah, most of our when we see eared and horn grebes, which have distinct summer and winter plumages, we see them in this basic winter plumage, which is not very colorful. They're quite pretty. You see a few in spring in alternate plumage when they are much more colorful. But most of them we see like this. And then we thought we'd show you these. It's kind of interesting. Probably, hopefully everyone who's been birding for any length of time realizes that these are oyster catchers. Black oyster catcher is the one that we have most commonly along rocky shorelines, rocky coast. They're fairly easy to find and pretty cool birds. And then we do also have very distinctive. I don't think it really needs much of a description. Nothing else that looks even close to it. We also have American oyster catchers, and American oyster catchers are tricky because they interbreed quite widely with black oyster catchers. So you can get a lot of hybrids that look intermediate. And there's something called a gel scale, which you can run down like 10 different points, like how much white is in the tail, how far is the black clean at the bottom of the breast, and you can actually get a number score that tells you, is it a hybrid or is it a pure American oyster catcher? I had asked Kimball Garrett a while back, and I think you're kind of at the point where anything that looks pretty much like an American oyster catcher, they're validating as an American oyster catcher, because it's often really difficult to determine precisely if it is a full pure American oyster catcher. This one looks a little muddy maybe with that mottled line between the breast and belly, but pretty much an American oyster catcher. And that's the rare one. Very few of those recorded in LA County still.
Well, I took this blurry shot, I think from a car looking out again at Blue Ridge. And I thought, well, we shouldn't use this. John said, yeah, we should. I said, well, you're sure? Yeah, no, don't use it. Yeah, go ahead.
The bad photos are the best ones for learning stuff.
And sometimes this is the way birds look, right? Before you can get your bins on them in shaded area. So this is a brownish bird, wing bars, not a whole lot going for it. Streaky up and down the belly. Right away, we should probably think this is a juvenile bird. This was summer, so it's off the nest in the summer. It's got a couple dark marks outlining the chin. But, you know, is it a mockingbird? Is it a house finch? No. This is a cowbird, a young cowbird. It's nice. The bill would help if it was sideways, but these are what juvenile cowbirds look like.
We got our countdown going here. We got this is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're on slide 5. So we're almost to the end. And remarkably, we're going to be almost exactly on time, 1 hour. That wasn't supposed to show up. Well, the picture was, but not the name. So we can go on to the next. No, I'm kidding. So juvenile tree swallow, we gave that away. Kind of uniformly dark above. It has kind of a breastband, and juvenile tree swallows do have a kind of a breastband, so they could be confused with bank swallows, which is a much smaller, more petite, browner swallow. But look for these juvenile tree swallows, usually with adults, which is helpful, but they don't have the dark green backs like the adults, and they do have this kind of partial, at least, dark breastband, but very long-winged, little forked tail. And these are birds that seem to be becoming more common as a breeder. They require tree cavities or nest boxes, as you may know, and there are programs that are providing more nest boxes for them, which they seem to take to readily. And they also are nesting in trees with the proper cavities at like Leg Lake and Sepulveda Basin. So that's always nice to see.
So a couple of excellent photos by John, birds close up and in good sun, good light. We wanted to talk very briefly about subspecies because when I started birding, I knew there were things subspecies. I was a zoology major, but telling them apart in the field, that wasn't my first interest. If I could get the species, that was good enough. But this guy comes in 5 or so subspecies. I didn't count.
Yeah, I think there's 5 at least.
The one on the right is supposed to have the candy color bill, candy
corn, kind of.
Candy corn
orange
colored bill, and that's pretty close. It has white lower, in front of the eye is pale, not dark. If it was one of the eastern races, or at least another race farther north, we'd see black there. That eye stripe would go right through to the bill. They both have black and white crowns. These are adults, not brown crown. And the one on the left, you can see the bill color is definitely different. It's more yellowy. And the brown on the back may be more brown than reddish. You're getting some nice rusty tone on the one on the right. So if you're used to the one on the right, in the winter when they're here, has anyone seen one yet? Have you?
Well, in the Sierras.
In the Sierras, okay, where they nest. Okay,
Should be arriving any moment.
so anyway, the one on the left, if you travel north up to around Monterey, you have a good chance of seeing the resident white crown up there is Nuttall-eye. Pugetensis, you can go ahead and show. You can guess that's from the Puget Sound area, but it goes up and down the coast. So we wanted to show you the range maps real quick for the subspecies. And
So, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Gamble-eye.
Gamble-eye is the common winter white-crowned sparrow, and these are scarce, much scarcer in LA County and usually coastal. And then the interesting range map.
so basically, the subspecies hang out in their own range. Leucophrys is the eastern. Here it looks like some intergrade zone. The Gamble-eye, huge range for breeding. All the orange is breeding zone. You get down here and there are basically no breeding by white crowns. I think that might be Mount San Gorgonio. There has been breeding there, but it's super rare. So anyway, red is summertime, way to the north, breeding ground. Blue is winter, and here they all come to get out of the heavy snows and cold. And Gamble-eye fills our area. But then these guys are pretty close. Nuttall-eye, Pugetensis, Pugetensis coming down from the north here and moves down in the winter. So they're uncommon, but you can find them. Maybe your photos would help the best.
But you can just call it a white-crowned sparrow if you wish.
Okay, you must be getting more
That's it. Female American kestrel, just to make sure we've identified everything. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the photos and the discussion.
Actually, which the
That one.
cartoon?
Let's give one more round of applause for Jon and Mickey. Excellent, Jon. That was great. What a great slide to end on too. Well, thank you everybody in the room and on Zoom. We apologize for any of the technical difficulties in the beginning, but we're so thankful that it all worked out before the presentation happened. And we'll see you next month on Zoom, the third Wednesday of the month. All right, thanks everybody. Or next Wednesday at Birds and Beers. This is correct. Yes. All right. Thanks everybody.